Hello everyone. Today's video is the second video of my How to Play Chess for Beginners series, and it's about special moves that different pieces can do. So now the first move we're going to see is called en passant. It's called that. I like calling it en passant, but it's called en passant, which is French for in passing, and you can do it with the pawn. So now let's say that moves like this is the starting position. So let's just say that something like this is played, and now what happened used to be in earlier times is that even at the start of the game you can only move a pawn one square, not two squares. So like the two squares rule is new, and many people were like sad at this, and they were like, okay, so now suppose that black played d5. Now if it was in olden times and like d6, then you could take, right? But let's say he played d5, and now what happens is that you can still take this pawn like this. So that is what en passant is. Okay, I'm just going to call it en passant. So that's what en passant is. And like, so for white you can only do en passant when your pawn is on the 5th rank, and black can only do en passant when his or her pawn is on the 4th rank. Now let's see, like okay, so that's the thing. And let's say something like g3 is played, then e5, knight, I'm just making random moves, knight h3, e4, and now if d4, so like black can also take it en passant. Something like f4 is played, then here also, and now against e4, suppose black plays something bad like f5, but you don't take the pawn, you play e5, and now d5 is played. You might be thinking, okay, which of these two pawns should I take? Well, you can't take both of them because you can only do en passant when your pawn is on the 5th rank for white or 4th rank for black, and your opponent like just moved his or her pawn 2 squares. Like this pawn was there already from the first move, but this pawn is a fresh pawn, so you can't take like this. See, you just can't. It's not allowing me to. But you can take this because it just moved. And so like that's en passant. Next thing we're going to look at is castling. And like castling is very important in the opening and middle game to get your king safe. So now let's say that white plays knight f3, black will just play random move like knight a6, g3, knight b8, bg2, and knight a6. So what happens in castling is that I'll just open a new analysis and show you. So what happens is in castling is that the king jumps 2 squares to any side, to any rook, and that rook is popped over the king and lands on its other side. So like this is the position that came before. Now white can do castling, so his king will move 2 squares and the rook was popped over. Now over here I'm just going to say one thing. If you're castling, do not move your rook first because it will count it as just the rook move. Yeah, sorry, over here, do not move the rook because it doesn't count it as castling. So if you're ever playing in a tournament, just like don't play that. Now you can castle king side or queen side. So like c3, the queen side also, it's the same thing only. Your king moves 2 squares towards here. Only thing is this rook will move 3 squares after that because you still have to pop it over the king. So like knight c3, knight a6, b3, knight b8, bb2, knight a6, d3, knight b8, queen d2, knight a6, and now you can move like that and your rook popped over. Now, so the criteria for castling are that none of your pieces should be in the way. So over here, we had moved all the pieces between the rook and the king out over here. So we could castle. Then over here also, we had moved all of them out. To castle queen side, it takes a little more time because your queen also needs to get out. And now you can castle because there are no pieces in between. Now, I'll just show you something. So like, you cannot castle if, so like, if the rook, whichever rook you're moving to, or the king has moved. So now let's say that knight f3, knight h6, g3, knight g8, and like in the last example, white just played like bishop g2 and it was fine. But so like castling should be the first move of the rook and the king. Then suppose he plays rook g1, same thing is repeated and rook goes back, knight goes back. And now after bg2, knight h6, like you can't castle because the rook has already moved. Same thing goes with wait. So like even if the king has moved before, let's just do like that and king f1. Moves, king moves back. Moves back. And now if knight f3, you still can't castle anyway because your king has now moved. In the first example, it was your rook. Same thing with queenside castling. If your king or your a1 or a8 rook has ever moved, you can't castle. By the way, all the castling and then passant and all rules, they apply to both white and black because otherwise it would be unfair. So let's say like b3, and now over here d3, knight b8, knight a6. Okay, yeah. If he plays like rook b1 or something, knight a6 and that goes back and that goes back, and queen d2, now you can't castle because your rook already moved. And like over here, if you play like d3, then knight goes back and like you take your bishop out maybe, and knight and queen d2 and knight a6. Say you move your queen, then knight goes to a6, and let's say you move your king first, and now you do everything again, then you still can't castle because your king already moved. Now you cannot castle if your king moves through check. I'll just get to like the starting position. So you can't castle if your king will move through check. So move through check, the square it passes through, land in check, the square it ends up at, or is in check, the square that it is on before that happens. So now let's just say like e4, e6, so like French defense, and now white plays f4. Then let's just go forward, knight f6, knight f3, b6, g3, bb7, bg2, and now white is all ready to castle. But after bishop c5, white cannot castle because see, because he would land in check right now. He could have landed in check. Now, so instead of playing f4, this opened up the bishop's vision at the g1 square if it ever came to c5, right? So instead of f4, you could have played something like knight f3, and then if you repeat the same thing, then now if bishop c5, then this f2 pawn protects the king and you can safely castle, and like bishop b7 castling only. Now I'm going to tell you what happens like, wait, over here, after bg2, if something like bishop a6 were to happen, then white still cannot castle because the f1 square would be in check by the bishop. The bishop has vision on f1. So the king cannot castle because it would move through the f1 square and that will be protected by the bishop. So now I'm going to show you an example of the king being in check. By the way, all of these three rules about checks apply to queenside castling also. So let's say that we have a Scandinavian, and so all natural moves over here. And now white is again all ready to castle, but black plays queen e5 check, and now you can't castle because your king is in check. So you would like block the check and then you can castle. If you do king f1, then you can't castle at all because your king has moved. But so you cannot castle your king out of check. That's a better way to put it. You cannot castle your king out of check. Now the last thing I'm going to tell you about, like the last special move, is called pawn promotion. So let's say that you have this position in the end game and it's white to move, then h4, a5. Now let's just say that these two keep going, and now we reach here. Now you might be thinking, if this pawn will move forward, it won't do anything. Like if there were pieces on the board, let's say that there is a rook right here, the rook right here for black, this rook for white, then this pawn could not do anything if it was here because it cannot move forward. It has no files to move forward, and it cannot capture anything, and it cannot support anything. So what the rule of pawn promotion is that if a pawn reaches the end of the board, it promotes into a stronger piece, which is a bishop, a rook, a knight, or a queen. Now usually you will promote to a queen because it's the strongest piece, but it's not compulsory to promote to a queen. You can also promote to a knight, rook, or bishop. When you promote to a bishop, rook, or knight, then it is called under promotion. And usually if there's any under promotion, then it's usually to a knight, since they are like tricky pieces. So if there's an under promotion, it's usually to the knight. And so like those are the three special moves that I wanted to tell you about today. I'll see you in my next video, and that will be about aim of the game and how can it end. Till then, bye bye.